Why would anyone write a sonnet? I think this is a really good way for us to approach reading a sonnet. If we start with a skeptical attitude, I think we'll get very far in understanding why sonnets are written the way they are and how the way that sonnets are written makes a big difference in what they're trying to tell us. If we understand that a sonnet is a very strict form of poetry, then I think we're on the right track to understanding how sonnets use that strictness either by following it or by rebelling against it in order to lead us into their meaning. So years ago, you probably didn't read Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time, but there's a little exchange in that has to do with the sonnet. In your language, it says, you have a form of poetry called a sonnet. It is a very strict form of poetry, is it not? There are 14 lines, I believe, all in iambic pentameter. That's a very strict rhythm or meter, yes? And each line has to end with a rigid rhyme pattern. And if the poet does not do it exactly this way, it is not a sonnet, is it? No. But within this strict form, the poet has complete freedom to say whatever he wants, doesn't he? Yes, Calvin nodded again. So, said Mrs. Whatsit. So what? Oh, do not be stupid, boy, Mrs. Whatsit scolded. You know perfectly well what I am driving at. You mean you're comparing our lives to a sonnet? A strict form, but with freedom within it? Yes, Mrs. Whatsit said. You're given the form, but you have to write the sonnet yourself. So the meaning of the sonnet is closely connected to the form of the sonnet. And the fact that the sonnet is one of the strictest forms of poetry is extremely important for understanding what it has to say about human life. Strict rules, as many of you know, create a feeling of order. They protect us from fear of change, chaos, and uncertainty. Strict rules can be comforting, or at least they can provide a feeling of control, even if they don't provide that reality. We can think that if we follow the rules, then we can be protected from change and chaos. Now, there are two attitudes towards the idea that strict rules are comforting. First, yes, following strict rules is all you need to know to be happy in life. And two, you're fooling yourself. Change and chaos are going to get you anyways. If you think about it, you probably are more in one camp than the other. But we're all in different camps and at slightly different places. The sonnet sits on the perfect fence line between these two attitudes. It can go either way. And the sonnets that follow the form strictly tend to be about the ways in which life can be controlled. They focus on what is orderly and predictable, and they present a picture of life that is orderly and predictable. Sonnets that break the form, on the other hand, tend to be about the ways in which life is subject to change and chaos, which we can't control, and how life must be accepted as it is, and not pushed into shape. Now, I said they tend to be about this. That means noticing whether the form of the sonnet fits the rules or breaks the rules is a starting point for interpreting a sonnet. You can't just say, oh, this sonnet has a perfect rhyme scheme, therefore it's affirming the orderliness of life. It's just a starting point for looking into the sonnet and asking the right questions. But that's crucial. That's a really big start. So let's try this. The first thing is, let's remember the rules of the sonnet. So the two primary forms of sonnet which we use in English are the Petrarchan and the Shakespearean. So their rhyme schemes are here, and I'm not going to go over them because if you're watching this, you probably have already some familiarity with these. But you'll notice that the rhyme schemes are slightly different, and also the red marked poetic turn is in a slightly different place. The poetic turn is also called the volta, which is how I'll be referring to it in the rest of this presentation. Now, the volta is where the meaning shifts in some way from the first part to the second part. They're closely related, but there's a change. Now, the other rule that's really important to the sonnet, to both of these, is the use of iambic pentameter. So I've written out iambic pentameter here as soft, hard, soft, hard, soft, hard. And another way to say that is ta-da, oops, ta-da, 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 ta-da. That's 10 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But they're grouped into twos, and pentameter means 5 meters, 5 measures. So therefore, there are 5 measures of 2 beats, each totaling 10 beats. And here is a Shakespearean sonnet line: "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" Now, it's going to sound weird when I read it, and I'm not going to encourage you to just dive in and assume that meter is going to make sense to you right away. So one of the things I won't be assuming in this presentation is that you're going to hear the meter exactly as I hear it, but I'm going to suggest certain ways of hearing it. So with this line, for example, if I did it the opposite, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" you would realize that it's certainly better, if not perfect, to say, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" than it is to go the opposite. Even though in actually speaking the poem, we're going to soften that, and it'll be more like, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" And you won't be able to hear the articulation of the iambic pentameter quite so clearly in that. But it doesn't mean it's not fundamentally there and that Shakespeare didn't put it in there. So now we're talking about hacking the sonnet. And the first step we use is to start with the structure. So in interpreting a sonnet, do not start by trying to understand what it is about. That's misleading, because so much of the sonnet's meaning is tied up in its structure that you have to look very closely at its structure before you're even in a position to talk about its meaning. So instead of talking about what it means or what it's about, start by asking, does it follow the form or does it break the form? That's the first question you ask about a sonnet. Once we know that, then we know the next step and the next step and the next step. So I'm just going to move myself out of here a little bit. So here I have a sonnet, an old sonnet. Doesn't really matter what it's called or who it's by. I found it on a website where someone proposed it as the worst sonnet ever. I definitely don't agree with that. But I'll read it, and I marked it up a little, and I'll walk through the markings. "My lady's hair is threads of beaten gold, her front the purest crystal eye hath seen. Her eyes the brightest stars that heavens hold, her cheeks red roses such as seld have been. Her pretty lips of red vermilion dye, her hand of ivory the purest white, her blush aurora or the morning sky, her breast displays 2 silver fountains bright. The spheres her voice, her grace the graces 3, her body is the saint that I adore. Her smiles and favors sweet as honey bee, her feet fair Thetis praiseth evermore. But the worst and last is yet behind, for of a griffin she doth bear the mind." So you may be able to already get a sense of where this poem went from the last couple of lines, but I'm not going to talk about what it means right now. I want to talk about its form. So first of all, you'll notice that we have a very strict Shakespearean sonnet rhyme scheme. A, B, C, D, C, D, and so on, all the way through E, F, E, F, G, G. I've highlighted the rhyming lines so you could see them, and they're perfect rhymes. We don't determine whether a rhyme is perfect or not by reading it, we determine it by listening to it. And so gold, hold, seen, been, die, sky, white, bright, 3, be, adore, evermore, behind, mind. These are perfect rhymes. This sonnet is not doing anything illegal whatsoever. The iambic pentameter is also perfect. My lady's hair is threads of beaten gold. Again, let's flip it. My lady's hair is threads, you get it. And the second line, her front the purest crystal eye has seen. So we have da-da, 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 etc., 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 all through the 14 lines. I understand why someone nominated this as the worst sonnet ever, even though there are many, many worse sonnets than this one. So what you see is that this sonnet followed the perfect Shakespearean order. Someone took a lot of trouble to make sure it was the perfect sonnet, at least in form. And we still haven't started talking about the meaning, but now let's take a look. So the order of the poem reflects the order of the subject. By this, I mean that this is a very orderly poem, and this is a very orderly presentation of its subject. So the poem gives a completely predictable set using classical comparisons of descriptions of a woman's physical beauty. My lady's hair is threads of beaten gold. Her. It's talking about my lady the whole way through. And it's talking about her physical characteristics all the way down to her feet fair Thetis praiseth evermore. And in line 12. So at the end, the last two lines, there is a twist. So in other words, we have a very predictable description of a woman's incredible beauty using classical comparisons that are outrageously exaggerated. But then at the end, but the worst and last is yet behind, for of a griffin she doth bear the mind. So there's a twist. Yes, outwardly she's incredibly beautiful, but her mind is a terrifying, ugly, mythical bird. Now, one way to see this is that despite the orderliness, what I've told you is not true, and that the poem actually is unpredictable despite having this perfect order. But actually, this ending description of the woman's ugly mind inside a beautiful body is quite predictable. The sonnet is supposed to have a shift in meaning at that point, so that's not unusual. We should find but or some word like that at the beginning of line 13. And not only that, but this kind of poem about women being beautiful, oops, I made a typo there, but beautiful outside and monstrous inside was pretty common when this poem was written. So it reaffirms the orderliness of male-dominated perception of women. In short, this poem is doing something in a very orderly way. It's predictable, it's reaffirming the order of reality, even though it's suggesting that the outside of a woman does not predict her inside. So the point is that while the poet presents his lady's ugly mind as a surprising contrast to her incredible beauty, this is not really surprising. And it's not really saying that life is surprising or unpredictable. This message about women was, unfortunately, still is very common in the way men speak about women, especially beautiful women. So it really is a poem that reassures the reader that things are exactly as they should be, predictable and orderly, even if it's in a somewhat disappointing or painful way. The point is, this poet followed the sonnet's rules strictly and was able to deliver a message that external beauty is not a sign of internal beauty using the volta. And in fact, we could say that the volta, that turn, the but at the before the last two lines, is the most important feature of this poem, and the poet has made the best possible use of that in the context of a message that isn't maybe so great, and in the context of reaffirming a view of women that's all too predictable. So now we're going to take a look at a different kind of poem. So here's a sonnet by Gwendolyn Brooks, Gay Chaps at the Bar, that breaks the rules. So I'll read it, and then we'll take a look at the rhyme scheme, and then we'll some other formal characteristics before we talk about what it means. We knew how to order just the dash necessary, the length of gaiety and good taste, whether the raillery should be slightly iced and given green or served up hot and lush. And we knew beautifully how to give to women the summer spread, the tropics of our love, when to persist or hold a hunger off, knew white speech, how to make a look an omen, but nothing ever taught us to be islands, and smart athletic language for this hour was not in the curriculum. No stout lesson showed how to chat with death. We brought no brass fortissimo among our talents to holler down the lions in this air. There's a very different sound to it, you can tell right away. And I'm going to point out a bunch of features that are clearly designed to use the offness of the form, to break the form in order to communicate something about a broken world. So what we see here is this is not Shakespearean, this is closer to the Petrarchan form. So whereas the Shakespearean rhyme scheme that we saw earlier was, let's go back up here, Shakespearean was A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G. This one is A, B, B, A. The Petrarchan form, sorry, is A, B, B, A, B, B, A, C, D, E, C, D, E. Now, this poem is not perfectly Petrarchan, but it does start off with an off-rhyme ABBA form. So dash and lush, while you might not hear it immediately, they must be rhymes because they're so close, the sh sound. But it's not a perfect rhyme because it's ash and ush are not perfect rhymes. Similarly, taste and iced, the consonant sounds are too close for this to be an accident. It must be a rhyme. But at the same time, ace, ice, the vowel sounds are not rhymes. So we have an ABBA stanza there. Now, whereas the Petrarchan would return to A, we have a CDDC here. We go to a new rhyme, and we have women rhyming with omen, and we have of our love rhyming with hunger off. And again, you hear the offness of the rhyme there, but it's still following the basic Petrarchan format. Even though the letters are slightly different, you have the first line of this quatrain, rhyming with the fourth, and the middle two lines rhyming. Now we come to the more complicated part. So we have a new rhyme, just like the Petrarchan, and we have, so E, F, G, we have 1, 2, 3. These three lines don't rhyme with each other. That's just like the Petrarchan, but then something weird happens at the end and they get mixed up. So what you see in this poem is a progressively greater degree of disorder as the poem goes on. And that degree of disorder corresponds to the deepening mess that the poet is depicting among Black soldiers returning from the war. So we're getting close to the point where we can really talk about the meaning of this. But I just want to point out that we have a poem that has something to do with a traditional strict rhyme scheme, but it's falling off pretty quickly. Another way in which it falls off is it doesn't have 10 beats, it doesn't have iambic pentameter. So instead of da-da, 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 we have da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da-da. It's like Morse code. And you'll notice there are 9 syllables here, so it can't be the 10 of iambic pentameter, and there are 13 syllables here, and again, it's not iambic pentameter. So 2 other ways in which this poem doesn't fit the rules in addition to the rhyme scheme are, as we saw, the rhymes are off, like lush and dash and taste and iced. They're also called slant rhymes. And the syllable count and the meter doesn't fit at all. So, turn my little question mark, what's going on there? So I'm not going to read all of this to you, but this is a quote which you might take a look at if you pause. And so Gwendolyn Brooks has talked about her use of rhyme and form in this poem, and she's referred to Gay Chapseth as the first poem in a series. She's referred to as a sonnet series in off rhymes because I felt it was an off rhyme situation. And what she's writing about indeed is the situation of Black soldiers who return from war having gained a kind of confidence and bravado that they can project in a bar, but also having become damaged from being in the war. And it's an especially problematic situation because in their community, they have risen very high because they joined the military at a time when it was just desegregated. They knew white speech, as the poem says. But at the same time, war damaged them just like it damaged any other soldiers. And so there's this terrible burden on them to appear to be something that they really are not. And it's a situation that affects Black soldiers differently than it affects white soldiers, although there are certainly enough connections that a white soldier could read this and find himself in it. So the imperfect form of Brooks' sonnet communicates something about the imperfect world that Black soldiers returned to after World War II. So let's just look one little step deeper before we end this. The off-rhymed words here in the beginning of the poem, dash, lush, taste, iced, they communicate a bar atmosphere, an atmosphere of entertainment and sophistication. You can hear the swish of fine clothing in dash and lush, and you can hear the clink of ice cubes maybe in glasses at the bar. I think you can. Taste, iced. Then the volta takes this very surprising turn. And the last 6 lines of the poem end in duller words, duller sounds that dampen the cheerful, these are a little close to each other, but the poem ends here, that damp the cheerful bar sounds, and they talk about the damage that being in the war has done to these men. So the volta, again, is marked as very conventional, starts with but nothing ever taught us. So there's a sense of what they learned, what they acquired from being in the military. And then at the same time, nothing ever taught us to be, and then it's really talking about to face death, to be islands, to be alone and self-sufficient, and to have a way of talking about this hour, which is not the hour at the bar, but it's the whole hour of having been in war and having had to come back. And so then we have these sounds like hour, stout, brought, talents, air. They're kind of final. They don't have the shushy and clinky sounds of the beginning of it. So that's all I've got to say about this. Just to recap, the way that we begin to look at a sonnet is we ask, first of all, why did this person choose this very strict form? And the answer, which in a certain sense, we will never know why the person decided to write a sonnet. They might have just felt like it, or they just like the form. But the answer is always going to be tied up in this notion of, were they trying to project a sense of rule-bound order in the world, or were they trying to project a sense of chaos or change? And to look more closely at the world by showing how we live within these structures, like Madeleine L'Engle's character said, but we have the freedom to make it up as we go along. And sometimes as in this sonnet, we don't necessarily have that freedom, but the chaos comes upon us whether we want it or not.